Hello and welcome to the fifth installment of my series, Does X Deserve Love? This time we're taking a look into dancers and ballerina romances. I will be asking the question, do I think that these characters deserve their happily ever after? Now, I've not read a lot of dancer stuff in general. I've read a couple of fanfic AUs of the subject, but other than that, nothing immediately comes to mind, so it's kind of hard for me to properly put in a good estimate as to how this is going to go. However, I do think that there's going to be an awful lot of big egos that will come into play here, so maybe I feel safe in estimating up to a 50-50 split. 5 romances will be good and deserving, while the other 5 will be absolute trash. Although please note, I will only be commenting on the dancers. If the love interest is something other than that, but they're absolute trash, yes, I will comment on it, but I'm here to discuss if I think dancers deserve love, not rocket scientists. I also tried to find some other forms of dancing and not simply ballet. I'm not sure what my grab bag has led me, but we'll see. I wanted to find some pole dancers, but I feel like most people who write that do it for the fetish content, which kind of makes me sad since pole dancing as an art form is really beautiful. I also tried to find some burlesque dancers, but same problem, I guess. Once again, these books are suggested to me via lists on Goodreads as well as Reddit recommendations. So if these books are bad, then you should blame other readers for having suggested such terrible books. Also, standard disclaimer that I think everybody deserves love, assuming, of course, that they're willing to put in effort into actually being lovable. Those jerks that start off a romance by sexually assaulting somebody do not. Up first was Take the Lead by Alexis Daria. Do I think that Gina deserves love? Yes, but I feel like this deserves a bit of context of why I decided this. This is yet another one of those where on paper their relationship was pretty good. However, it's not so much anything specific that either she or Stone did, but rather how stupid that they were. The plot of this book revolved around one of their celebrity dancing competitions where D-list actors are paired up with actual dancers and one pair gets eliminated every week. Gina's dance partner is some reality TV star, so both of them were in the business of Hollywood and faking stars simply because it draws in viewers. That being said, Gina struggled for the first act of the book about the crazy chemistry she had with Stone, but not wanting to cave into the dance competition's producers' pleas to do a showmance. She kept saying that because she was Latina, she didn't want to promote the image of promiscuous, sexy Latina. And I get that, but I was also really frustrated when she and Stone started sleeping together. Like, this on-camera relationship has a pretty defined end date. Why is it difficult for you to want to wait a few months and then see where it goes? She was also really angry when a cameraman caught them kissing and the producers used it as behind-the-scenes footage. Like, do you understand what kind of business that you're in, right? If your skin is that thin, maybe you should find another job. Their actual relationship was fine. They were simply stupid about the entire thing, and that was endlessly frustrating. I also didn't exactly see the two of them working out long term. The bit in the epilogue where things magically worked out was pretty much only because the author demanded it. Up next was First Position by Melanie Hamrick. There were a lot of dancers and I'm lumping into all of this, however, I don't feel 1 ounce of shame in putting each and every single one of them under the no umbrella. The first main character, Sylvia, is a young woman who is struggling years after the end of a toxic relationship that she first entered when she became a professional ballerina. Even 4 years later. Right off the bat, her attitude was setting up some serious red flags when she pointedly told the readers that she'd begun smoking in order to impress a guy, although the habit was lasting longer than the relationship. Like, girl, you don't even love yourself. I'm gonna go ahead and recommend that you seek out self-love before you deep dive into romance things. As the story unfolded, we find out that at the tender age of 19 and her first professional position as a ballerina, Sylvia got involved in the, I'm not sure what he was, dance director of the place where she worked, Sebastian. The man was like 40 or 50, and it was obvious that he was using his position in order to convince the young ballerinas to sleep with him. Obviously, this guy is an instant no. However, Sebastian kept convincing her to drink, even though she was underage, and the start of this was in New York. He also kept giving her drugs. And yes, he shouldn't have been doing any of that, but 19 years old is 100% old enough to know not to take random pills from guys simply because he's technically your boss. To make matters worse, there was a second female lead, Jocelyn, who Sebastian drugged into their sessions. As if that's not bad enough that he'd ply them with alcohol and then put drugs into their mouths, he also forced them to have lesbian sex with one another. Let's say that if the next thing was the Law and Order SVU thing, nobody would have batted an eye over this. I hope that this goes without saying, but what a completely and utterly messed up thing to do to a couple of barely illegal girls. To make matters worse, when word got around about Sebastian's relationship with Sylvie, Sebastian was quick to throw Sylvie under the bus and paint her as a desperate harlot. 4 years later, and Sylvie had yet to recover from any of this and was abusing substances to numb her emotional pain rather than to actually go to therapy. Yeah, that sounds super healthy. The book insists that this is a romance novel, but despite all of the graphic sex throughout this book, I would be reluctant to call it that. It's instead a book about a bunch of completely deranged people doing deranged things to each other and then acting upset that others were quick to call them out for all of the derangement. It was totally a book about sex, drugs, and procreation, if you will. In the present day, there was this honestly kind of random plot about another male ballerina, Alex, who was trying to have a relationship with Sylvie, but she kept insisting, even to his face at one point, that she was only looking for a quick fling and nothing more. The fact that she accepted his offer for an actual date at the end of the novel does not somehow turn this train wreck of a story into a romance novel. And also, I thought that it was laughably hilarious how at the end the author decided that Jocelyn also needed a happy ending, so Sylvie contacted a guy that Jocelyn had had a one-night stand with 4 years earlier and invited him to watch her show. Like, why? Why would this somehow constitute a happy ending for Jocelyn? It was so random and out of left field. Then I read The Cheat Sheet by Sarah Adams. Do I think that Bree deserved her happy ending with Nathan? Yes, but this requires a bit of explanation. This story followed former ballerina who'd had her dreams crushed by a few years earlier when she was in a car accident that completely messed up her knee. Now she's barely getting by teaching underprivileged youth how to dance. Her best friend Nathan is a football star in the NFL. Despite her insisting out loud that the two of them are only friends, she secretly yearned for him, and Nathan yearned for Bree. It's not so much that I don't like some mutual pining, but this seriously grated on my nerves. It wasn't good and I wasn't exactly rooting for them. As the story progressed, Nathan's manager convinced the two of them to enter into a freaking relationship, not to convince the public of anything, but rather to sell Tide pens. I am not kidding. Bree was so broke and kept refusing money from Nathan that she agreed to do it. And I get it, but at the same time, girl, have a little bit of dignity, would you? Tide pens? Really? You're gonna sell out for laundry detergent? After they agreed to do this fake relationship, Nathan's friends helped him come up with a game plan to help him finally convince Bree that they should be together romantically. The narration tried to convince us that this was a titular cheat sheet, but I'm not really sure that this phrase is what I'd use to describe what was happening. I can't really see it working if Bree wasn't already head over heels for him, because as it was, whatever he tried to put the moves on her, she'd freak out and push him away further. In the end, do you want to know what convinced her that he was serious? Them talking to one another and confessing their love. Wow, who would have thought that having an open and honest conversation would seriously clear the air and get the ball rolling? This is another one of those stories where on the surface there wasn't anything inherently wrong. Neither Nathan nor Bree did anything worthy of even a tiny red flag, but they were simply so stupid about every single thing. It was really annoying to read. Up next, I read A Rehearsal for Love by Alexander Warren. This was a double feature with the female lead being a wannabe dancer and ending up with at the dance studio of a retired famous dancer. Do we think that Malia deserves love? Yes. And while her deserving of love might be a green flag, all of that comes to a screeching halt when it comes to the male lead Blaze, because boy, so many red flags. Right off the bat, this story came off as nothing but the author's wish fulfillment fantasy. Malia walking over to a dance studio that was conveniently being built in her neighborhood. The guy who owns the studio is her childhood celebrity crush and former dancing star in her specific style of dance, hip-hop. He took one look at her and fell head over heels for how attractive that she was. Malia was also the bestest dancer, even at auditions with professional dancers, when Malia herself hadn't really practiced dance for a few years. It seriously took me out of the book. Now this is where things started to rub me the wrong way. For starters, Blaze had a girlfriend. And if you've read enough romance novels, I'm sure that you can already guess exactly what her personality was like. It was pretty obvious right away that the girlfriend, whatever her name was, I don't even remember, it doesn't matter, was being nasty for no real reason. Blaze didn't like her and was more interested in chasing after Malia, which is fine. Break up with her. What do you mean you didn't break up with her? Blaze kissed Malia when he was still in a relationship with his old girlfriend. And this is the reason why Malia herself is a green flag. She was so quick to call foul on that kiss. She called Blaze out for still being in a relationship with somebody else. I don't care how much of a nagging female dog that a woman is, she is still your girlfriend. What is wrong with you? Also, can we take a moment to talk about how terrible and abusive that Malia's mother was? At first, I can kind of understand the mother's point. Dancing isn't exactly going to pay the bills unless you've already got doors open for you. You should probably have a backup plan, and you do that by going to college. But by the time that Malia and Blaze did hook up, the mother went from rude but understandable to holy shirt balls, lady, what is wrong with you? She threw Malia's abortion into her daughter's face, and as if that wasn't bad enough, but Malia later explained to Blaze that she kind of regretted having gotten it. The only reason why she had gotten the abortion was because her mother pressured her into it, then took Malia back into her home, forced her into business, and constantly told Malia that she was worthless garbage. I know that it's realistic for Malia to go completely no contact with her mother after that, but at the same time, I really wish that this book had shown the mother getting humbled in some way. The abortion topic segs into the ending of the book, which was another huge red flag for Blaze, although by this point Blaze was kind of trash anyway, so I don't know why I'm surprised that he continued to be trash with Malia. She ended up getting pregnant. And I know, surprise pregnancies. I understand that a lot of people don't like this, and this was one that I actively hated. But the problem was that Malia had finally managed to get her foot into the door of dance by going on a tour with a famous hip-hop artist as a backup dancer. She was getting offers left and right, only for her to find out that she was pregnant. She wanted to get an abortion for the sake of building up her career, which is completely understandable. Why other people get abortions is none of your business. But Blaze, he was a retired dancer. He was setting down roots, and one thing that he wanted to have was a baby and start a family. He didn't want Malia to get an abortion, despite the fact that it was Malia who'd have to put her life on hold, whose body would be completely wrecked, who would have to spend time nursing, taking care of the baby, etc., etc. It's never an easy decision to make no matter what. In the end, Malia did keep the baby, but I feel like things really only worked out for her simply because the author demanded it, not because Malia herself put in any actual work. It was a happy ending where they had their little family simply because the author wrote it that way, which is going back to how I felt like this author's wish fulfillment fodder. Up next was Death's Dancer by Jasmine Silverera. Do I think that Isla deserves love? Yes. This one was kind of odd in that it was a supernatural romance where the female lead was a god's dancer, meaning that she performed magic dances to attract the attention of gods in order to grant her patrons favors, such as closing a house or making that business deal. But her life is turned upside down when she's requested by the local necromancer, who is obviously her main love interest, in case you couldn't get that from the title. And I was really down with the necromancy part. I thought that it was interesting, but this book lost some serious brownie points for coming up with an interesting plot where they introduced the fact that all of her brothers were werewolves and her mother was a witch who had arranged marriages of her sons to other witches. Back another plot. This one is overdone and dry. It was hard for me to call this a straight-up romance novel. Like, yes, there was a lot of romance, and there were even several spicy scenes, but I was honestly way more interested in the murder mystery aspect of this book, as well as the alternate history where necromancers ruled our contemporary world. There wasn't really anything wrong with their relationship. Azriel was a gentleman and went out of his way to assure Islia that he couldn't use his mind control magic on her, and as I said, the romance wasn't exactly the main plot of this book, so yeah, but it's hard to complain because after having read now 4 books of modern dancers, it gets kind of boring after a while, so sometimes it's nice to take a slight sip into a bizarre supernatural story. Although this book was the start of the series, it wrapped up the Azriel Islia romance. I have no desire to keep reading, especially not if the other books are going to be about Islia's werewolf brothers. Ugh. Edit. I looked up the summary of the other 2 books. They're still somehow about Azriel and Islia, despite me having said that their story was essentially over. I'm still not interested in reading more things. This was a standalone novel, and you cannot convince me otherwise. Bye! Then I read The Ballerinas by Rachel Capicley-Dale. I think that I need to preface this by saying this book was not a romance novel by any means. If anything, it reminded me a little too much of First Position in that it was a tangled mess of stuff happening, bad decisions all around, and people getting so unbelievably hurt. That being said, it being a romance novel holds little to do with the basis of this project. Do I think that characters deserve love? Simply because she didn't end up riding off into the sunset with anybody at the end doesn't somehow stop me from passing judgment about who Delphine is and if she's deserving of love. Yes, there were a lot of ballerinas in this book, however, despite the fact that this is every bit as much as Margot and Lindsay's story, I will only be focusing on Delphine. Do I think that Delphine deserves love? No, but this is a super complicated, messy story, and as such, the answer is messy and complicated. Her own mother was a dancer who regretted having Delphine and made sure that her daughter knew it every single day of her life, yet she also pushed Delphine into becoming a ballerina as well. Later on in the story, Delphine meets a man 20 years her senior who drags her from Paris to St. Petersburg, Russia to become a choreographer, and as I'm reading all of this, watching as Delphine struggles with her self-worth in the face of classroom ballerinas who refuse to listen to Delphine or take her seriously, even after 13 years in the role of choreographer, I kind of had a moment of Delphine's entire life has been dictated by other people telling her what she should do. Her mother forced her to become a ballerina, but did she actually want to do this? Then Dmitri basically coerced her into moving to St. Petersburg and into giving up dance to become a choreographer, but what did Delphine actually want? We don't know because she's deluded herself into thinking that this is what she wants. Her relationship with Lindsay and Margot was also not good. I understand that they attended the ballerina boarding school together, that they literally grew up together, but at the same time, the book would have us believe that the three of them were as thick as thieves, yet Delphine spent 13 years only writing them an email once a month. That's 156 emails, by the way. Lindsay suffered a tragic traffic accident when Delphine intentionally tripped on her shoelace. Granted, they were trying to stop Lindsay from sleeping with a ballet judge to get a solo, but still, she completely and utterly ruined Lindsay's life. She was literally never able to do a pas de deux again because of the injury to her ribs, and obviously lead ballerinas who can't do a duet are not lead ballerina material to start with. At the end of this story, Lindsay confessed that she'd known the entire time that Delphine had done it intentionally, and she still somehow forgave Delphine, even if Lindsay said that she understood that Delphine and Margot were trying to stop Lindsay from seeking her own career. Wow, I don't think that I could forgive somebody for something like that. And then rather than to take her lumps, Delphine ran off to Russia for 13 years. She had a good excuse to go to Russia, but at the same time, felt like the main reason she went wasn't so much the hot Russian choreographer and rather trying to hide from the shame of what she'd done. Later, there was a subplot where Delphine finally hooked up with the hot male at Ballerina that she'd been pining after since they were children. However, upon completion of the bedroom act, she finds that he'd recorded the entire thing, and as if that wasn't bad enough, she was not the first girl that he'd done this to, and that he was actually holding it over their heads in order to get things from them. She blew the whistle on that, which is pretty much the only right and just thing that she did this entire book. She blew the whistle even at the cost of her own reputation, as well as the knowledge that he could and did eventually release the tape. By the way, we never actually saw any sort of actual resolution to this other than the fact that he'd been blacklisted in the dance world, which I suppose is kind of the point. Real life doesn't always come with Hollywood endings, but at the same time, she was going after him legally for releasing revenge porn, and it's like, hello, what happened with that? There was also a subplot with the elderly neighbor to where Delphine lived, who was pretty much the only positive adult figure in Delphine's life. To say that Stella was a mother figure to Delphine is an understatement. But much like her relationship with Lindsay and Margot wasn't good, so was Delphine's relationship with Stella. She actively blew off taking Stella to the hospital for a planned hip surgery to mope about Jaw having made a sex tape of her. And I get that it's upsetting, but holy cow. Stella later chewing Delphine out and calling her out on her nonsense was literally the best part of the book because, yeah, you are a self-absorbed a-hole. The only reason why Delphine moved back to Paris was because the dancers in St. Petersburg finally told Delphine about Dimitri would stick it into any woman who offered. I felt like Delphine had no self-respect, no self-worth, and no sense of who she was. Yes, part of that can be attributed to the way that people used and manipulated her for their own gain. Her mother, Dimitri, and the people of the dance company, Jock. But at the same time, Delphine was in her 30s. She was still doing stupid stuff that if she had been 16, I want to be batting an eyelash over, forgetting to help her mother figure out because she's too busy crying over a boy, letting herself get bamboozled by a pretty boy, letting another pretty boy groom her and then cheat on her for years. Some people might argue that half of the point was how sheltered that these girls were in their ballet school, isolated from the world so that they could only focus all of their time and energy on dance. But after Delphine moved back to Paris after finding out that Dimitri had been cheating on her the entire time, it's time to grow up, babe. You're an adult now. Stop making the same stupid mistakes you made when you were 17. Up next was Instructions for Dancing by Nicola Yoon. This was another double feature with amateur dancers this time. Hey man, any level counts, you gotta start somewhere. Anyway, do I think that Evie and X deserve love? Yes, but it's rather complicated. A review of this book said that this wasn't a romance novel, and I kind of half agree because the main theme of this book was love, but at the same time she literally didn't ride off into the sunset with X because it said that he later died, so yeah, I'm not sure if that counts. But when you compare it to The Ballerinas by Rachel Capacur-Dale, anything seems like a romance so long as there's two characters who are madly in love and remain in love until the epilogue. In this story, a young girl, Evie, is struggling after her parents got divorced. She's quick to tell the readers that after they'd separated, she'd gone over to his work to try and talk him out of it, only to find him canoodling with some homewrecker. As you might imagine, this kind of soured her for romance, which I think a lot of people would find rather understandable. She's getting rid of her romance books at her neighborhood free little library when she randomly got magic powers. What power, you ask? Every time she looks at a couple who is kissing, she sees how their relationship ends. Granted, it's not every couple, since not all couples are heading for Spritzville. If you're expecting any sort of explanation for this, don't hold your breath. This was literally never explained. She met a witch at the beginning of the story, and then again at the end right before she lost her powers, and then that was it. Zero explanation. It was the only bit of supernatural in this story. Yes, it was about as stupid as you might imagine. Anyway, in an effort to try and get rid of her new power, Evie ends up going to a dance studio where she meets the owner's grandson, Xavier aka X, which might have been a cool nickname when this was written, but it has since aged like milk. The two of them are roped into doing an amateur dance competition for the studio. As they practice and hang out together, they fall in love. But right after they do their final dance, Evie has one last vision of how her relationship with X ends, with him dying in about 8 months. While she's learning how to dance, she struggles with her father moving on and eventually wanting to marry the girl that he cheated on his wife with, which, wow, buddy, don't be shy. The ink on your divorce is barely dry and you're already moving on. Honestly, that speaks volumes about who he is. Evie is obviously upset as anything about this, and then Daddy Dearest has the audacity to be upset that she's refusing to come to his wedding. Like, read the room, buddy. To make matters even worse, the mother is upset that Evie is upset about her cheating ex-husband. Mommy Dearest seriously looked at her daughter dead in the eye and told her that it wasn't like her life had been turned upside down, despite the fact that her parents got divorced and she was forced to move and her father was moving on and clearly had little interest in spending any amount of time with his daughters. Wow, don't be shy. Tell your daughter how you really feel. Overall, there was nothing on the surface that said that neither Evie nor X were undeserving of love. However, much like how this book threw an entire subplot of, oh, the female lead got magic powers to see how people's relationships are going to end, the author clearly couldn't be bothered to give any character much personality. Evie liked her friends and being angry at her dad, and that's about it. X liked being a high school dropout and being in a rock band, and that's about it for him as well. Both of them had about as much depth as a teaspoon. But hey, it's easy for me to say stuff like they deserve love, but I'd also like to say that they deserved an actual happy ending and not X dying of a heart defect 8 months after the end of the book. Up next was The Muse, a Pride and Prejudice variation by Jessica Evans. And, in case you couldn't tell by that title, but yes, this was Pride and Prejudice set on a backdrop of contemporary ballet. So do William Darcy, choreographer, and Elizabeth Bennet, ballerina, deserve love? Yes, but I feel like this is another highly nuanced answer. I suppose that Darcy was a bit of a jerkwad at first, however, there's my broken meter for things popping up once again, because while he kind of treated Elizabeth like garbage in the beginning, it's not like he sexually assaulted her, kidnapped her, tried to isolate her from her friends and family. My god, the bar is on the freaking ground here. True to the source material, Darcy did realize that him being a giant jerkwad towards everybody, especially Elizabeth, got him nowhere. In fact, he couldn't even be with the woman that he loved, Elizabeth, because she thought him mean and was baffled by his confessions of love. But this is where it fell a little flat, because yes, he did fix himself, but we never really saw much of that. It was mainly, maybe I should smile at these other ballerinas at the other company and not be half as nasty, and I feel like I've read better books that explored this more in depth. Furthermore, I never really saw why Elizabeth decided that she had changed her mind about Darcy. He was rude to her, confessed his feelings, and then he wrote her a letter and said all this stuff about Caroline and Wickham, and then she immediately forgave him and decided that she loved him and had blown her chance with him. Girl, have higher standards. Returning a sabotage, stolen point shoe should not be the deciding factor upon you trying yourself to a guy forever. Ugh. Again, kind of feel like my meter is a little off too, whereas several years ago I probably wouldn't have been so quick to say, yes, they deserve love. Now I'm kind of like, meh, he didn't hide all her clothes in order to force her to wear lingerie all day long. The bar is on the ground here. Then it was The Music in the Mirror by Lola Keeley. Not only was this a twofer, but it was also a lesbian romance as well. Do I think that both Victoria and Anna deserve love? Yes. I want to preface my commentary about the book with a complaint, however, because by now I have a feel for ballerina novels. Yes, a lot of them were toxic messes, but my god, at least something was happening. The two of them didn't even hook up until halfway through the story. It was mainly a lot of Victoria being the boss, head choreographer at the ballet company that Anna worked at, and maybe there was sexual tension if you weren't expecting a lesbian romance. I walked in basically blind to that fact. Anna was a special ballerina who was picked in her first season within the ballet company to be the prima ballerina, and so she's super special, and Victoria really enjoys the way that she dances. On and on and on it went. There was no real problems. The best what we got was the pianist was jealous and put glass into Anna's shoes one day, so Anna hurt herself, but she wasn't even hurt all that bad, and Victoria knew who it was and fired the pianist almost right away. So even that was a big, as the kids say, nothing burger. All that being said, because of the non-plot, there was nothing horribly offensive about Anna and Victoria's relationship, even when it did take ages to get to a singular point. Yes, it did feel quite forced, and here comes that dreaded insta-love. However, maybe it's simply me having hung out in lesbian spaces for so long, but something U-Haul lesbians. At the end of it, Victoria did end up moving to France for a dream position to choreograph at a company there, which is completely fair. And when Anna followed her to join the company, at least it made sense because they were both in the ballet world. None of this moving to Brazil to be with the guy I met last month, even though I own a bakery in Detroit nonsense. So that was one nice thing about all of this. Finally, was Mambo in Chinatown by Jean Kwok. Do I think that Charlie deserves love? Yes. The story followed the first-generation American Charlie as she struggled to balance actually living her own life as opposed to the strict social rules that her Chinese-born father expected from her. Her father had all of these lofty expectations for her, such as to get married into somebody who would take care of her, yet, as you might imagine, didn't actually want her to date anybody. It was honestly kind of frustrating with how much his unwillingness to change was holding back not only Charlie, but also his younger daughter, Lisa. Charlie gets a job working as a receptionist at a dance studio. Then an instructor thinks that she has what it takes for her to become a great dancer. And I get that it's possible to be discovered, but were willing to go on a limb and hire her as a full-time dance instructor while Charlie herself could barely dance at all. I like this story, but this pushed things too far in my opinion and broke the immersion in the story. On the other hand of this, I feel like Charlie's romantic interest, Ryan, was kind of a louse. Now, I'm not really including him under the umbrella of dancer, if only because he was doing the dance lessons to do a sister-brother dance at his sister's wedding, instead of a traditional father-daughter dance because their father was dead. Yes, he did do the dance competition with Charlie, but he wasn't planning to continue after their competition. However, he did have a long-distance girlfriend, which was one of the reasons why Charlie kept holding herself back as far as being in a relationship with. That and the studio's strict no student-teacher fraternization policy that left the job opening that Charlie filled. But despite being in this relationship, Ryan kissed Charlie while he was still with his other girl. Yes, they did eventually break up, but it doesn't matter that they were heading for Splitsville well before the incident. The guy still cheated on his girlfriend, and that's obviously super not okay. But as far as Charlie's story went, yes, she does deserve love. She worked so hard to get to where she was, often fighting against the shame of all of the Chinese Americans around her who wanted things to be exactly like how they were in China, the country that they all fled from because of communism. Ugh. I'm all for maintaining your culture, but some of the decisions some of the characters made in this were downright bizarre and borderline child abuse, such as Charlie's father refusing Western medicine treatments for his sick wife. And I get that medical bills in the US are outlandish, don't even get me started on that, but I think that maybe pushing forward would have resulted in finding something wrong with his wife that could have been treated, and he wouldn't have ended up a widower with 2 daughters to raise. When Lisa started to display symptoms that were eerily similar to her mother's right before her death, again, their father refused any sort of Western medical treatment and only insisted upon traditional Chinese medicine, except that Charlie was fighting tooth and nail, convinced that if she could simply get her sister in to see an actual medical professional, then Lisa could and would get better. When it was revealed that 12-year-old Lisa was being molested by a man twice her age, at least the adults reacted accordingly and chased the pedo away. But at the same time, this could have been dealt with a lot sooner and saved Lisa a lot of grief if Charlie had been allowed to take Lisa in to see a therapist like she wanted to from the get-go. The entire thing was so frustrating. So there we have it, 10 books about dancers. Not all of them were what I'd consider to be romance, but as I said in my quick review of them, that doesn't somehow mean that the main characters are somehow more or less deserving simply because they didn't get their chance to pirouette off into the sunset. Overall, only 2 books had flat-out no's, which isn't bad, even if 4 of those yeses were classified as soft yeses and some no's in the double feature romances.